Hello, and welcome to another edition of Not Your Granny's Opera Podcast. This is episode 3, and today it's just going to be me again. So, let's get this going. First of all, our shout out for the week this week is Schmopera, which is a website that I love checking out. It's basically a website that has a bunch of articles about singers and about opera. It's kind of a go-to place to get in on the all the latest with productions and up-and-coming artists, and also articles written by singers about what it's like in the industry and the various things that are going on. You can check them out on their website. I will put it in the link below. They also have a Facebook page, which is where I initially found them. But it's a really, really cool resource for anybody, whether you're a singer yourself or in the industry, or if you just want to dabble and learn a little bit about what it's like in the opera world. All right, now for Colline's Corner. This week, I thought it would be fun to do a on this day in opera history kind of thing, but for the whole week. First of all, in 1892, the Met in New York, the original opera house, set on fire. It was lit. On the 28th of September, we had two different things that went on. First of all, we, of course, had the premiere of Wagner's opera Lohengrin in Weimar. And it was also in 1913 is when Richard Tucker, one of the most famous American tenors ever, was born. Richard Tucker is a really, really fun person in American opera history. I mean, he was a dramatic tenor, wonderful voice, and I love that his legacy is being carried on by his family, because every year they have what's called the Richard Tucker Award, and it's a grant that goes out to up-and-coming artists. I think it's $50,000, something like that. But not only do they have this grant and this competition, but every year they put on a gala, and it's usually the winner, obviously, is the feature performer, but they bring on a lot of the former Tucker Gala winners, and then other up-and-coming stars as well that honestly probably are going to eventually win the Tucker Award too. So it's one of my favorite concerts to watch. I haven't been to one live yet, but now that I'm out in New York, maybe I will one day. It's one of those where if you need an introduction into opera and you want to hear some amazing singing all in one concert, the Tucker Gala is a go-to. You can't miss it. And then finally, and I'm so glad that this happened, because I absolutely adore the piece that this person wrote. On September 1st, Engelbert Humperdinck was born, and of course that was in 1854. He wrote the infamous Hansel and Gretel, which is one of my favorite pieces to perform. I've done it many times as the father. Actually, one production I even did it because it was an outreach, to schools. I was the father and the Sandman, which the Sandman is normally sung by a soprano, but we moved the key down, thankfully. Oh, you don't want to hear me sing as high as that person does in the morning. Would have been a train wreck. The thing I love about Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel is that it leads you into bigger German things. Like, it's basically Wagner, which Wagner is the German composer. It's basically Wagner light. Like, it gets you into how that kind of music sounds, and the twists and turns and the chromaticism and the mystical nature of a lot of German repertoire is. And it's a familiar story, of course, Hansel and Gretel. So it's another great piece if you're looking for something either for yourself to get into opera, or if you're looking for something for your friends. It's a really fun piece. So actually, funny story. When I was doing this production of when I was the Sandman, it was in northern Idaho, and I always remember this because it was one of those decisions. I haven't made a lot of decisions like this on stage, acting decisions. I'm like, yeah, I'm never doing that again, kind of thing. That's usually, if it's in that vein, it's like, well, then that didn't really work how I thought it was going to, or yeah, that just didn't work, so let's try something else. But this is like, no, unless a director specifically tells me to do something like this. So we were like 2/3 of the way through the run. So I thought, oh, Well, I thought, because it's northern Idaho, I would put like a country accent in it. So like the words were, because the Sandman puts the children to sleep. Uh, so instead of saying I shut the children's peepers, it's like I shut the children's papers, something like that. And I get done with it, and there's this long interlude on the way out where I have to kind of like slink out, and I just go backstage, which there really isn't a backstage in these places, but to where people can see me, and I was just like, no, no, never again. But I saw it through. I kept the accent. It was beautiful music, and I don't even know if the kids really even enjoyed it. It was just weird for me, and it takes a lot for me to get to feel weird about the stuff that I do. So, at least on stage. All right, now for the last part of the podcast. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about character development, especially when those characters are not exactly nice people and or people who we really are not in our real lives. Like, for example, I often play as a baritone or a bass baritone. I often play the bad guy. And so, these people include murderers, rapists, seducers, liars, basically the most terrible things that you can think of. And also they're very conniving and evil. All right, so the first thing to do when you get a role is to do research on it. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you need to be the encyclopedia after it's all said and done about this role. That's not what you have to do, but you need to know what's going on, right? Like, for example, if we're talking about The Ballad of Baby Doe, for example, that's an American opera written by Douglas Moore. It was actually written about a real person, right? Baby Doe and Horace Tabor, which this all took place in Colorado during the mining and stuff like that. There's also, people like William Jennings Bryant, the president of the United States at the time, he has a whole aria in it. So, you need to know if there's any historical things about it. Not just like how it's historically played, but like if they were an actual person. So then go in and just get some real basic information about them. I haven't had a director yet, let me put it this way, that wants me to know the nitty gritty details and be like one of those reenactors of like Ben Franklin, where you can go up to them and have a conversation and they'll have, the right answer that Ben Franklin would probably say if he were actually there. So it doesn't need to go that far, but you need to have a general understanding of their demeanor, their life sketch. When the kinds of situations that influence their life. If you can find that information out. Sometimes you have real people. Other times you have common figures in literature, like, for example, Cinderella. There's tons of operas that were written based on Shakespeare plays, so you can always go there, Macbeth, Othello. So you get all that information, and then you have to surmise how that will influence how you walk, how you sing certain phrases, and you use that in your preparation, in the musical preparation. It's just good to go in with ideas and at least be able to explain why you want to do those ideas, and also why you feel a certain character would or would not do something, and all that. The second thing is the plot line. So once you get an idea of who this person is, then you have to go to the music, and you have to know the actual plot line of the show and how they interact with other characters in the show. What is their relationships? What is motivating certain things to happen? Like, for example, The Marriage of Figaro. There's this scene towards the beginning where the Count comes in, and he, of course, has a thing for his wife's servant, Susanna. And Carabino was just in the room before the Count shows up. Carabino's hiding, and then the Count comes in. He has this little interaction with Susanna, which of course is really inappropriate. He wants to sleep with her even though he's married. And then they hear Basilio coming. So then the Count hides, okay? So we have two people hiding at this point. Basilio comes in. He starts talking with Susanna, and then there's some references that get the Count kind of worked up, and he pops out of nowhere, right? To say, hey, what are people saying about me? And so they start the trio, and then eventually through the trio, the Count finds Carabino. So it'd be one thing if you just played it as he's really mad at the situation because he got caught doing something really inappropriate, potentially, with Susanna, even though he didn't sleep with her yet, but he's, being really predatory and predatory. Sorry. But it's another thing if you play it as what it usually is, and that is Carabino is constantly a thorn in this guy's side. Like, he just is always there at the most inopportune times. And so you have to know how the characters interact. There can be things that are laid out in the libretto or in a synopsis or in something you can read, but sometimes you got to make up things. Like, you could say, well, okay, Carabino's been a thorn in his side for a while. And so then you go into your creative process like, well, yeah, like 2 weeks ago he did this and this and this. And then like a month ago he was in there with the Countess and he's in there smelling her clothes, and that was weird. He's doing that, and then he's just constantly getting in the way of me being with Susanna. There's lots of different angles that you can put in there that are either already expressly talked about, or you can just make them up. That's one of the great things about acting and stuff, is you get to explore and create and all that. So now let's move forward in the process. Okay, so let's assume that you've learned the role, you've memorized it, you're now working with the conductor and the stage director. One of the most important things in creating a believable character, in my view, and it especially helps out in your prep, if you can do this early, is to have inner monologue. Okay, so inner monologue for me serves two purposes. One, it keeps you in the scene and keeps you thinking as you're actually doing the show. Because when we're interacting with people, we're constantly hearing things and thinking. So you need to be in there and you need to be having the wheels turning, right? The other thing that inner monologue is great for in your practice is start thinking about, like, okay, what would this person say about a particular thing, right? So for example, one of my favorite shows is How I Met Your Mother. You could go through that show and be like the peanut gallery in this show as you watch it, and you could take whatever character you're working on and do that. Like, for example, when I was writing Don Giovanni, I thought of Giovanni much like how Barney is on that show. So, but you could go through and make comments, about Lily and Marshall as if you're Don Giovanni, which may or may not necessarily jive with what Barney would say, because Barney and Giovanni are very similar, but you could react to what they're saying. It's just really good to think about what makes these characters tick and how they really, really think. Because then it gives you ideas as you're working through the whole process. The other main thing about roles and making them believable is how you move. So one exercise that I did in an opera workshop that I felt was really good imagery, at least, if you're having a hard time getting into it, is to imagine that you're actually in their shoes. Now, I know that's a cliche phrase, but I mean, like, they had this whole process of, like, okay, so act as if you're standing in front of whatever you think this person looks like. Now, of course, if they're a historical figure, like we talked about, you have actual pictures, likely. Otherwise, you just got to kind of, what does your mind see? I don't know, if you're a mezzo, what does Carmen look like to you? And so then you just imagine as if you are enveloping their body and, like, inside, and, like, looking through their eyes and feeling how they would feel and how they would move, which may or may not be things that come naturally to you, but your brain is so powerful at creating these sympathetic things going on and these images that can help you get into these characters. And so then you basically, through this process, you walk around as if you are this person. Let's talk about getting into these kind of deviant people, we'll say. You know, it's really tough because some of these people, we can't imagine ourselves even thinking of doing something like that, like these people do, let alone being them. One of the things that one of my teachers in my master's taught me was, she said, you know, within us is the very best and the very worst of humanity. And I always come back to this because it really is true. I mean, you don't have to look far to see this. Just go on social media and the outrage culture and the things that people do to those who have an opposing view of them, whether it's, you know, white nationalists, whether it's Antifa, whether it's you know, all kinds of political and social groups that are constantly fighting each other, all of them thinking that they're justified in what they're doing. And see, that's what it really comes down to, is this justification. For example, whoops, clearly I was practicing earlier because this is on. I'll shut that off. So, like, for example, when it comes to this justification, there's arguably no greater one line in all of opera that I know of than Don Giovanni's line. Don Giovanni in Act 2, he comes out and him and Leporello are fighting. And Leporello is done. He's like, I'm not going to help you anymore. And he's like, Leporello, come on, dude. He's like, and he's, you know, refusing to go to him. And he's like, but I have money for you. And of course, Leporello always takes the money. And he's like, but this is the last time I'm going to help you. But it eventually gets to a point where he's like, you need to give up women. You need to stop seducing them. You need to quit being an ass. And Giovanni, with a straight face, says basically, look, it would be a tragedy if these women didn't get a chance to love me. It's more tragic if they don't get a chance to experience me because, you know, reading between the lines, I'm the best that potentially they're ever going to get. I'm amazing. I'm the best at being a lover. You know, all these different things that may or may not be true. Because, of course, in Giovanni, we only really see him successfully seduce one person. So it's all about justification. So what is driving these people? You know, you could go to Blitch in Susanna. In Susanna, Blitch is a preacher. He's a traveling preacher, and he goes into New Hope Valley, and he, you know, of course, is trying to get people to repent and join the church and all this stuff, and he sees this girl, Susanna, and he falls in love with her. She's a teenager, and eventually in the story, she and her brother Sam, they live out in the boonies, and one morning or whatever, she's out taking a bath in the creek, and she's seen by some of the elders of the church, and she is then accused of basically being inappropriate, and you know, she was just trying to get the attention of the men and all this stuff, which is not true. She was literally just there to bathe. That's it. She's been doing it all summer, and now they start freaking out about it because they happen to see her, and she didn't even see them. That's the thing. Okay, so then the whole plot turns into Blitch, the people wanting Blitch to get Susanna to repent. Okay, so Blitch tries. She refuses because she feels she has nothing to repent about, which is fair. You know, she doesn't. She was literally innocent in that moment. She had no ill reasons for being there. Okay, so then we fast forward, and Blitch goes to her house while Sam is gone, and basically tries one more time, and she's so distraught, and she just like breaks down because he's still trying, and then he says, I've wrestled with my soul night after, or wrestled with your soul night after night. Maybe tomorrow you'll come to the light. So presumably, a good person would leave. Like, look, she's clearly not going to repent. I've done my duty as a religious person, a religious leader. I can't make people repent. I'll just go and I'll try again in the morning. But then you hear the creepy interlude. And from there, Blitch turns from what appears to be a sincere effort to get her to come to God. He then preys on her and says, the next thing he says is, "I'm a lonely man, Susanna. And every now and then, I need somebody. Somebody I can love like other folks do. Because it's a lonesome work I do." So he's then turning on her human side, and he's like, "Look, I'm lonely. I have needs. I'm like everyone else." And then he says, "My reward's in heaven, and there's little reward here below. But every now and then, I near go mad. I need a woman, so." She's just done. She's like, "Fine." And so they go in, and he, of course, rapes her. It's just out of desperation of just wanting this whole thing to end because she's been having everybody coming after her. Just giving in to what he wants to shut him up. That whole thing happens. The next morning he comes out, and he's like praying to God to forgive him. I'm like, dude, you just defiled a teenager. And like an hour later, you want forgiveness from God when you have all this quote-unquote information, and you have this leadership and this ability to influence people to turn towards God. What was your justification? Your justification was you're lonely and you have needs. And of course you have people like Jose in Carmen, who he couldn't have Carmen. He wouldn't give, or she wouldn't give in to all of his begging and pleading, and so he stabs her. You know, what was the justification? He couldn't have her. So logically in his mind, he's like, well, if I can't have you, nobody else can. There's just a lot of hard things that we as singers have to grapple with. And I find that it's very, very informative to think about these justifications, but also to maybe even make up some things and just think about it. Like, for example, one of the things that I would do, I was preparing Tarquinius's aria from the Rape of Lucretia. In his aria, he essentially walks into her room and he's about to rape her, and he's like describing her and stuff like that. So I would sit there and I would just listen to it and try and imagine if I was watching a movie of this go down, what would it look like? Or if I was a director, that's another thing you can do in this whole thing prior to going to the rehearsal with the actual director, is to say, if I was directing this, what would I want this person to do? Where would I want Lucretia? Where would I, because she's laying in bed, where would I want the bed? What way is it facing? You know, what, am I going to touch her? Am I not? Am I going to be close to her? Am I going to, you know, and there's all these different things. And so all of that information can then be used to inform your justifications and how you act. That's kind of how I feel when it comes to portraying all of these really difficult characters. Is you have to do the preparation, you have to get in the mindset, you have to see their justification, and you have to live in their skin. And I guess probably the most important thing out of all of this in playing a terrible person is that you cannot judge yourself for any thoughts that you may have along the way. Like maybe, for example, at first you really hate the character, okay? But then maybe along the line, you're like, I can actually see how they would think that. Or even worse, I can actually see myself doing that. You just can't judge yourself because all of this is creative process. All of this is not real. You're just playing a character. Because if we go into, if we go method on some of these characters, oh, that's a really dangerous path, friends. I really do not encourage you to go method with some of these terrible people. That's it for the podcast this week. If you're interested in seeing more content and potentially asking questions or suggesting content, feel free to click on the link For my Patreon, I will also post the links for Schmopera, which again is a really cool magazine and online resource for all things opera related. And look forward to seeing you next week and talking with you.